The whip cracked through the air like thunder, splitting the bones of heaven. Each lash carved silence deeper into her spine. Mira didn't scream. Not because it didn't hurt. It did, more than words could carry, but because screaming would have meant surrender, and she had already surrendered too much. The courtyard was packed with faces that didn't move. Men with their hands behind their backs. Women with eyes fixed to the ground. Children hiding behind skirts, learning early what silence costs. This wasn't a punishment. It was a ritual, a warning painted in red. She stood, barely, with blood trickling down the backs of her legs, ankles wobbling, hands tied to the post by a frayed rope that smelled of rot and salt. "Rebellion," the magistrate said, voice soaked in arrogance. "Refusing a marriage contract sanctioned by this council and approved by the church. A betrayal of order, a stain upon tradition." Her would-be husband stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, face like stone. A man twice her age. A man who once cornered her in the corn cellar and whispered threats behind his smile. She'd struck him that night, left claw marks on his cheek. When they tried to force her signature on the parchment, she'd broken a finger trying to smash the ink bottle. They called it hysteria. The elders called it defiance. The lashes continued. 6, 7, 8. A woman sobbed into her scarf. A child tugged at his father's sleeve. But no one moved to stop it. Not in this town, not in Galesbridge. Here, girls were property. Contracts sacred, consent irrelevant. From behind the rows of watchers, beneath the crooked beams of the blacksmith's awning, a man leaned against a post. Broad shoulders, dirt-caked boots, a hat pulled low. He didn't blink, didn't fidget, just watched. Arms folded, jaw locked. The silent farmer. No one knew his name. They called him the one with the dead land, or crow farmer behind closed doors. He lived alone beyond the ridge, on soil others said was cursed. No livestock, no visitors, just long days and longer silences. Rumor said he once had a wife, hung for blasphemy in that very square, her body left to turn under the sun while children walked by it on their way to lessons. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 5 winters, but he was here now, watching. Mara's knees gave out at the 12th strike. Her legs buckled and her chin hit her chest. The enforcer raised the whip again, but a voice, unfamiliar, low and firm, cut through the air. "Enough." The magistrate turned. The enforcer hesitated. Silence spread like oil. "Enough," the voice repeated. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The magistrate, unsure, nodded once. The ropes were untied. Mara collapsed. The crowd began to shift, uneasy. Boots scraped, shawls were adjusted. Market stalls reopened like nothing had happened. A girl had been punished. Justice was satisfied. The rhythm of the day could resume. But the man in the shadows didn't leave. He stayed, waiting. The sun slid lower. The wind picked up dust. By the time the last door was locked and the magistrate returned to his office with a belly full of pride, the farmer crossed the courtyard. He knelt beside Mara. Her face was a map of pain. Her lips split, one eye swollen shut. Her wrists swollen where rope had burned her skin. Her breathing shallow. But there, her eye, the one still open, found his. "I won't go back," she whispered. He said nothing, but something in his gaze told her he understood more than she could ever say. Without a word, he took off his heavy cloak and wrapped it around her. The wool smelled of ash and cedar. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, carefully, like carrying embers. She didn't resist, didn't speak. Her head rested against his chest. He walked across the square, steps measured, unhurried. No one stopped him. The farmer's horse stood tethered outside the smithy, a dark mare with wild eyes as if she too knew the weight of escape. He laid Mara gently across the saddle, mounted behind her, and nudged the horse forward. No destination announced, no threats offered. He rode east, toward the woods, past the ridge, where no one dared follow, where maps stopped being useful and names stopped mattering. And for the first time in days, Mara closed her eyes and slept, not because she felt safe, but because she no longer felt owned. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Mara stirred on the straw bed. Her limbs ached, not just from bruises and torn skin, but from the tension that hadn't yet left her bones. She sat up slowly, blinking against the pale light pouring through a crooked window. The room was spare, wooden walls, a single chair, shelves lined with mason jars. The air smelled of earth and ash and something faintly sweet, like dried sage. A fire crackled low in the hearth. Her cloak, now folded, rested at the edge of the bed. Bandages wrapped her wrists and thighs. Her wounds had been cleaned. Footsteps. The door creaked open, and he entered carrying a small tin cup. Mira tensed instinctively, but he only set the cup down on a stool and nodded toward it. "Water," he said, his voice low and even, the first word he'd spoken since the square. She picked it up, hand trembling slightly, and drank. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. He didn't look at her, just moved to the fire and adjusted a log. "Mira," she offered after a moment. "I'm called Mira." A beat passed. Then, still facing the flames, he replied, "Abel." Mira repeated it silently, a name plain and strong, like cut stone. Abel. She let the sound of it anchor her as her gaze roamed the room. Every object had its place. No clutter, no vanity. A life built from habit, not hope. Later that morning, Abel returned with a wooden bowl of warm oats and herbs. She ate slowly, each bite a struggle. He didn't speak, just sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood into something that might have once been a spoon. The only sound was the wind brushing against the windows and the soft rasp of his blade. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "For how long?" "Long enough," he said. She wanted to ask more. Why he'd taken her, why he'd cared when no one else had. But the questions felt brittle, like glass that would break before the answers came. After the meal, he led her outside. The porch overlooked a wide stretch of land that sloped gently into thick woods. Trees bent in the wind, their limbs like twisted hands reaching toward a gray sky. A broken fence ringed the fields. Beyond it, rows of earth lay tilled but empty. "No one comes here?" she asked. He shook his head. "No one wants to. Because of the land? Because of me." His honesty startled her. There was no bitterness in it, just fact, like naming a storm that had already passed. The wind pulled at her hair. She closed her eyes and breathed. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there was no shouting, no hands gripping her arms, no eyes judging her from a pulpit or a bench. Just wind, just sky, just silence. Later he showed her the barn. Inside was clean, swept. Tools hung in neat rows. A single horse, the same from that night, stood calmly in its stall. She reached out and ran her fingers along its mane. It nickered, gentle. "She remembers you," Abel said. Mira looked over her shoulder. He stood near the door, arms crossed, watching. "I don't remember me," she whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded and stepped aside as she walked past him, back into the fading light. That night, she sat near the hearth, wrapped in the cloak he'd given her. Abel sat by the window, sharpening a blade he probably wouldn't use. Neither spoke, but the quiet between them was no longer empty. It held space. It listened. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He paused, his whetstone stilled. After a long moment, he said, "You didn't scream." She blinked. "What?" "In the square," he said. "You didn't scream." She didn't know how to answer that. Didn't know if it was meant as a compliment or confession. Maybe both. "I couldn't," she said finally. "If I screamed, I'd lose something I couldn't afford to lose." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. Then he returned to the blade, dragging the stone along the metal in a slow rhythm. Mira watched him, a silent man, a scarred girl, two people shaped by things that never asked permission to break them. And yet, here they were, not healed, not whole, but breathing, still breathing. The nights came and went like waves with no rhythm. Ruth said little, but her silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like smoke that won't clear. Abel never asked questions. He simply watched. The way she flinched when the wind slammed the barn door. The way she slept, curled into herself, fists clenched, braced for a blow that never came. He had known that posture once, long ago. One morning he found her at the well, sitting barefoot in the cold dirt, hands trembling. A fig leaf rested in her palm, its stem broken and browning. Her fingers bled lightly, thorns from the bush behind the shed, but she didn't seem to feel it. He knelt beside her, pulled a folded handkerchief from his pocket, and wrapped her hands with gentle care. She didn't speak, just stared at him, as if that small act had dismantled something long fortified inside her. And then, without warning, she cried, not with sound, just tears that fell, uninvited and unstoppable. That afternoon, Abel took her northward, beyond the ridge where his fields gave way to hills bathed in golden grass. They stopped atop a high point, where the wind tasted different, cleaner. He pointed to the south, where the shadow of distant mountains pressed against the edge of the world. "Tracks," he murmured. She squinted. "Train." He nodded, and with a finger, traced an invisible arc in the air, curving west. "It leaves from there." It wasn't just information. It was a lifeline. That night, Ruth walked to the barn while Abel fed the horse. She wandered to the corner where an old coat hung limp and forgotten. Reaching into a deep pocket, she pulled out a small wooden cross, weathered and splintered. She ran her thumb along the edges, the wood catching on a hangnail. Her eyes didn't blink. "He gave me this," she said when Abel entered behind her. "Before the wedding." Her voice was hollow. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. Abel took the cross, held it in both hands, then walked to the forge at the rear of the barn. He dropped it into the coals without hesitation. Together, they watched it blacken, then curl, then burn to ash. "No one owns you," he said. The next few days settled into a kind of rhythm. Not peace, but something close enough to breathe in. Ruth started tending to the horse in the mornings, brushing its coat, whispering things Abel never asked about. She began cleaning, cooking small meals, mending a torn shirt with uneven stitches. Her hands grew steadier, her shoulders less tight. Abel gave her space, but he was always nearby, not watching, just present. They spoke rarely, but the silences between them were no longer filled with fear. They were full of meaning, shared burdens, quiet recognition. One evening, as dusk swallowed the fields and the fireflies emerged like sparks from the tall grass, they sat together on the porch steps. The sky was bruised purple. The wind carried the scent of pine and old wood. "Did you lose someone too?" she asked suddenly. Abel nodded. "My wife," he said. "Years ago." He didn't offer details. She didn't press. There was a gravity to his voice that said everything. "She was punished?" Ruth asked softly. He stared into the trees for a long time before replying. She said no. That was all. But it was enough. Ruth didn't speak again. She just reached down, picked up a smooth stone from the step, and rubbed her thumb across its surface, slowly, as if grounding herself. That night, her dreams were quiet. No screaming, no shadows. Just the sound of wind and hooves and the warm breath of the horse she had begun to trust. But far beyond the hills and the sunflower fields, storm clouds gathered. In a tavern lit by oil lamps and whispered threats, men passed coins across tables. One of them bore a scar across his cheek, the mark she'd left with her fingernails the night she said no. He hadn't forgotten. Men like him never did. He drained a cup of bitter ale and said the words like a curse. "Bring her back." And across the room, a rider stood without a word, pulled a rifle from the wall, and vanished into the rain. He returned the next evening, just as the wind changed and the smell of smoke lingered over the hills. The shack where she'd been whipped had been torched. Charred ruins now, bones of timber left curling in on themselves like broken hands. No one claimed responsibility, but those who'd stood and watched that punishment without a word had been quiet ever since. Risa hadn't asked him to burn it down. She hadn't needed to. The silence between them had grown into understanding, wordless, solemn, stitched together by bruises and half-healed scars. Samuel watched her from the porch as she moved through his garden, barefoot, skirt brushing the dirt. The whip marks on her back were fading into scars, but the defiance in her shoulders remained intact. She never asked what came next. He never offered a future, but each morning she stayed. Another route took hold. There were no sermons, no questions, no promises. Just breath, just work, just the ache of healing bones and quiet glances, shared over firewood and rain buckets. Until a man rode up the lane one dusk, saddle slick with rain and voice too proud to belong on that land. "She's my wife," he said. "By law, by dowry, by God." Samuel said nothing. The man's lip curled. "You got no say in this, farmer. She's been taken. I'm here to reclaim." Samuel reached down slowly, lifting his axe from the stump without rush, without tremble. The head was rusted, the handle worn, but the weight still spoke of finality. "You don't reclaim people," Samuel said. "She's mine." "She's breathing," Samuel replied. "That's not yours to own." The rider dismounted, eyes narrowing. Rain began again, fine and needling, hissing on the iron blade. Risa stepped from the doorway behind them. Her hair was braided now, her feet bare. The man turned to her, expectant, but she didn't plead, didn't cry, didn't look afraid. She looked finished, with him, with that name, with the lie of belonging. "I'd rather die in the dirt than wear your name again," she said. That was enough. The man reached for his belt. Samuel didn't move quickly, didn't have to. The axe rose, then stopped short, buried not in flesh, but deep in the earth between them. A warning, a line. "Take one more step," Samuel said, "and I'll bury your name so deep it won't echo." The man's eyes darted, first to Risa, then to the edge of the axe, then to the gray sky that refused to weep for him. He left. That night Samuel didn't speak. He sat on the edge of the porch, hands blackened from tilling, heart heavy with something unsaid. Risa joined him, wrapping the old wool blanket around her shoulders. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "I know. I don't need saving." "I didn't come to save," he said, "only to stay." Her fingers found the edge of his sleeve, thumb brushing the seam like testing the truth of it. "There'll be more," she said. "Men like him. They don't stop. They come in groups, with words first, then fire." Samuel nodded. "Then we build thicker walls, and if they tear them down." He turned to her, eyes shadowed with something old and quiet. "Then we plant again, every time." She didn't smile, but her breath grew steadier. That night she dreamt of open fields and a name that belonged only to her. But peace was not made to last in places where cruelty breeds like mold. A letter came the next week, sealed in wax, crisp and cold, delivered by a pale boy who didn't wait for a reply. A warrant for abduction, for harboring stolen property, for aiding a fugitive wife. The town had chosen sides, and not theirs. Samuel read it once, then set it in the fire. He didn't flinch as it curled to ash. "You'll have to run," Risa said. "They'll jail you." He looked at her, slow and steady. "You'll stay." "No, you will," he said. "This land has roots now. You've planted them." "I won't leave," she said, voice rising. "You won't follow," he answered, not with anger, but with finality. She stared at him. "You'll be hanged." "Maybe," he said, "but not for silence." That night, they packed one bag, not two. Risa protested, but he only shook his head. In the early hours before the birds stirred, he saddled the mule, walked it to the edge of town. There, under the black oak, he waited. When the sheriff arrived, Samuel stood tall. The same man who'd once been spit at in the church pews for not kneeling. The same man who hadn't raised his voice in 20 years. "I'm the man you want," he said. The sheriff eyed him. "You know what this means?" Samuel nodded. "I do." Behind him on the hill, Risa stood like a ghost, watching, not crying. They took him away with rope, not cuffs. He didn't fight, and she stayed, free. The jail cell was small, no larger than a storage closet, with rusted iron bars and a dirt floor that turned to mud each time it rained. Samuel sat cross-legged, back against the stone wall, eyes half-lidded. He didn't pace, didn't speak. The sheriff had offered water and bread, and he'd accepted with a nod. But that was all. The townsfolk came to see him, some out of curiosity, others to gloat. He met none of their eyes. Risa didn't come the first day, or the second. But on the third morning, just as the mist began to lift from the fields, she arrived, wrapped in the same wool blanket. She stood outside the bars, hands at her sides, not gripping them, not begging. "They've set the trial," she said. Samuel looked up. His voice came slow, even. "Soon?" "2 days." He nodded once. "They won't listen to me," she said. "They say I'm confused, that you used me." He almost smiled. "And what do you say?" "I say I planted roots." A silence passed between them. Not empty, thick with everything they didn't have time to speak. Then, softly, she added, "I won't let them hang you. You might not get a choice." Her chin lifted. "Then I'll make one." That night she went to the chapel, the same one where they'd tried to wed her in chains. She waited until the priest left, then slipped through the back. There, in the candle-lit dark, she tore the old ledger from its shelf, the marriage register. Her name was there, scratched in by another hand, signed without her consent. A lie inked in scripture. She tore the page out, folded it once, and slid it into her blouse. The next day, she approached the blacksmith, an old friend of her father's, who had stayed silent the day she was tied and whipped. She said nothing, just held out the torn page. He didn't look at her, only at the parchment, now creased and stained. He nodded once. "I'll testify," he said, but it wasn't enough. That night, a stone crashed through the window of the farmhouse. A warning. Risa didn't flinch. She gathered her bag, left through the back, and rode to the edge of town, where a man waited near the bridge, the same rider who had once tried to claim her. She didn't speak, just handed him a letter, a confession, signed in Samuel's hand, explaining everything, his decision, his actions, his past. He read it, jaw tightening. "If this is true," he said, "he'll hang for sure." "It is," she said, "but it's not complete." She pulled a second paper from her coat. This one was hers. Every wound, every word, every lash described. "He didn't take me," she said. "He saved me." The man stared at her. Then, wordlessly, he took both pages and rode off. At dawn, the townspeople gathered at the square. Samuel stood between two guards, wrists bound. The gallows loomed. Risa pushed through the crowd. She climbed the platform before the sheriff could stop her. She held the papers high. "This trial is a lie," she shouted, "and I will not stay silent for your comfort." The square stilled. A judge stepped forward, lips pursed. "This man is charged with defiance of law, aiding a fugitive, obstruction." She cut him off. "He's charged with planting hope in ground you salted, with standing still while you chased ghosts of power and pride." The sheriff stepped forward, ready to grab her. Samuel spoke then, his first words in hours. "Let her speak." The sheriff paused. Risa's voice cracked, but she went on. "He took nothing from me. He gave me back my name, my will, my life." And for a moment, even the sky hushed. The judge took the papers, read. His eyes flicked back and forth, but his face gave nothing. The silence stretched. Then slowly, he turned to the crowd. "There will be no hanging," he said. A murmur rose. Protests. Some spat. Some turned away. But some, quietly, nodded. Samuel's hands were unbound. He stepped down. Risa met him halfway. Neither smiled. But they didn't need to, because some victories are silent, and some love stories never use the word at all. The weeks after the trial passed like the slow thaw of winter. Risa returned to the land. Samuel didn't speak of the gallows again. No one did. The fields needed tending, the roof needed patching, and silence returned. Not from fear, but from peace, hard-earned. The villagers no longer threw stones. They no longer threw words either. They watched from porches, behind curtains, behind faces that had forgotten how to feel shame. Not one apologized. But fewer looked away now. There was a new fence to build by the north line, and Samuel worked it slow, letting the rhythm of hammer and wood drown the weight in his chest. Risa brought him tea each morning. She never hovered, never asked if he was all right. Some wounds weren't meant to be dressed with questions. They just needed space to scar. One evening, as the sun dragged golden fingers across the hills, Risa stood barefoot at the riverbank. Her reflection wavered in the water, bending and shifting like memory. She bent, cupped the cold current in her hands, and let it fall over her wrists, cleansing the skin where rope had once cut deep. The water didn't care about her past. It didn't flinch. It didn't lie. It moved forward, always forward. Behind her, Samuel approached, boots soft in the grass. He didn't speak until she turned. "Looks like rain," he said. She nodded. "Let it come." They stood for a long time, just watching the water move. And when he turned to walk back, she followed. Not behind him, not beside, but with him. As though some quiet thread stitched between them guided each step. In town, people whispered about them still. Some claimed she bewitched him, others said he'd gone soft. But there were also those who had begun to ask questions about the marriage that never was, the justice nearly undone, the girl who now walked without flinching. Questions were more dangerous than torches, and more powerful. A girl named Lila came one afternoon. 13, eyes too old, a welt hidden beneath her collar. Risa sat her down, gave her tea, listened. She didn't offer comfort, she offered choice. You don't have to stay, she said. There's a road that leads west, or you can stay here. You decide. Lila stayed. A boy came next, then a woman, then 2 more girls. The barn became shelter, the old shed became beds. Samuel didn't ask. He cut more wood, mended what was broken. And Risa became something no one expected. Not a wife, not a ghost, not a victim, but a home. She never called herself that. But when they looked at her, they saw something steady, something no whip had broken. One night, Risa stood at the edge of the porch as thunder rolled far off. She traced the scar down her spine with her own fingers, not with shame, with remembrance. Samuel joined her, carrying 2 mugs. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. The wind lifted the curtain behind them, and lightning cracked over the field. "I regret I didn't do it sooner," he finally said. The rain came down in sheets, and they stayed, watching the earth drink deeply. They never spoke of love, but in the way they stood in storms, in the way they shared silence, it was there. It had no need for name or ceremony. It had been carved into them, slow, painful, and honest. Years passed. The land grew. Children arrived, some by blood, most by choice. The farm was called many things, but the name that stayed was the one carved in the beam above the barn: Rooted. Visitors came from towns far and wide, bringing girls who refused to bow and boys who refused to break. They found bread, shelter, work, and the absence of fear. Samuel grew slower, his hair silvered. Risa's steps grew surer. Her eyes never stopped watching the horizon. When Samuel died, it was in his chair, blanket over his knees, Risa's hand in his. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They buried him beneath the willow near the stream. No cross, just a stone. Risa sat there often, not to mourn, but to remember, to breathe. She never remarried, never left. When people asked why she stayed, she would say, "Because roots don't run, they hold." The girl who once bled beneath the lash now taught others how to build fences, grow food, and say no without shaking. They wrote stories about her, but she didn't read them. She wasn't interested in how people remembered her. She was too busy teaching others how to remember themselves. And in that quiet place carved from pain, one truth lingered like wood smoke in morning air. You can break a body, but not a will, not if it's planted deep enough.